Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and happy 2020 because this is the first video that I'm going to be filming in the new year, the new decade. How scary is that? I am going to be continuing on with the best of series because I wanted to do a roundup of my favourite books of 2019. I've already done one about beauty, so if you've not seen that one, you can go and check it out. I'll link it in the description box below or in the little eye thing. I read a lot of books in 2019. My original goal was 15 books and I smashed it and I went to 33 books. So I'm going to be talking about the 5-star books that I rated on Goodreads. If you're not following me on Goodreads as well, I would love you to come and say hi because that's my favourite space for like keeping a log of what I'm reading, what I've thought of certain books, as well as reviewing them on my blog as well. Some of these books have been sent to me by the publishing houses and some of them I've obviously bought myself, and some of them are on my Kindle. So if I don't have the actual copy of the book because it's on my Kindle, I'll just put like a cover somewhere on the screen so you can have a look and see what the cover looks like as well. So I'm so excited to jump into this. I want to do more book content this year. I used to do some like book reviews and they did really well. So I kind of want to go back to that as well as doing the reviews on my blog. So if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a big thumbs up and do subscribe if you are new. And let's crack on with this roundup of my favourite books of 2019. The first book I'm going to talk about is This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay. If you don't know what this book is about, I mean, this is quite a hyped book, but if you don't know what it's about, it's basically the diary of a junior doctor going through his journey after he has kind of graduated from medical school and goes actually into practice. And it's just his diary of all the little bits and bobs that goes on in hospitals, and it is just such an honest read. It made me cry at some point and it made me laugh out loud a lot of the time. It does get quite sad kind of towards the end, but the main premise is the humour is just amazing because it is very much that kind of honest, to the point humour that kind of comes up if you're a doctor on the wards and working for the NHS. And the thing I like about it as well is that it really does highlight what goes on in the NHS and how a lot of people who are working in it are struggling and how there's a lot of pressure on them, like they working ridiculous hours and how it affects them, their mental health and their families and things like that. Some of it is a bit graphic, so I'm just going to warn you now if you're a bit squeamish, but to be honest it's not too bad because I don't mind reading about that sort of stuff. It's when I'm actually watching it. So if you don't mind reading about kind of things that go on in your body, then you'll probably be fine with this as well. I absolutely love this. The next book I'm going to talk about is How to Stop Time by Matt Haig. I read this on my Kindle. I am such a fan of Matt Haig. I first came across him when I read his non-fiction books, which were Reasons to Stay Alive and Notes on a Nervous Planet. I just adored them and I was really interested to see whether his beautiful writing style was going to transition from non-fiction to his fiction books, and it really does. And this is basically about a man who ages very, very slowly, and they call themselves albatrosses, and I think they call the humans mayflies because obviously they have a very short lifespan, whereas an albatross lives for a very long time. And it's about him kind of working his way through his life and the problems that he faces, the fact that he sometimes has to up sticks and just go because he is kind of, people are starting to suspect that he's not really growing that much older. And it kind of centers in on a point where he is kind of at kind of a bit of a crossroads with his life. He's just started a new job, and it's nice because you do jump back and forth between the past and the present. And the great thing is you don't feel too kind of uprooted from what you've been reading. It kind of flows quite nicely between those two. I really loved the character of Tom, who is the main character. He is flawed, and I love that when a character is flaws and all sort of thing. They're not absolutely perfect. Yeah, so again, a really amazing read, and I just, up until the last page, I was like, what's gonna happen? Because I was just sucked in, which was amazing. The next book that I rated 5 stars was The Secret Life of Bees by Sue Monk Kidd. This was again like a really hyped book, and I picked it up at a charity shop and I was like, great, I'm gonna see how this goes, and I absolutely fell in love with it. So it's about a girl called Lily, and she's grown up on a peach farm for most of her life. Her mother died when she was young, so she lives with her dad, who isn't the nicest person. And she also lives with Rosaline, who is kind of like her nanny, but she's more the servant that has been brought in to look after her. And this is set in 60s America, where there's still quite a lot of racism going on, and because Rosaline is black, she is targeted at one point as she goes off to vote for the first time, and that is kind of one of the main themes running through it. And so Lily and Rosaline run away, and they find themselves on the doorstep of some beekeepers who are 3 black sisters, and it is just the most amazing story of how they deal with the racism, but also as dealing with being women. And I think that is a really important part, because they obviously have their own business. Some people feel threatened by that, and some people embrace it, obviously, as well as all of these themes that I've just talked about. You've also got the themes of the bees and nature. I really kind of felt like it was a great way of looking at how to respect nature, because it really does highlight the beauty of it, and you learn a lot about bees as well, which is great because I adore bees, and I think it was an amazing kind of way to learn more about them as well. It is a bit of a roller coaster. You go through some highs and through some lows. It is pretty brutal at some points, but I think it's also a really important read. I think it's one of those books you have to read in your life sort of thing. Next, I have probably my favourite book of the year, or one of my favourite books, and it is Things in Jars by Jess Kidd. So this was very kindly gifted to me by Canongate, and I just fell in love with this. So this is set in London in the 1800s, and it follows a female detective called Bridie Devine and her journey into finding about a lost girl called Christabel. And the really cool thing about this is that, I mean, I love the Victorian era anyway, but this is kind of mixed as well with the mystery of her as a detective trying to find out what happened to Christabel. It's also got a really cool mix of supernatural as well, because Christabel is not a normal child. And there's also some really cool bits as well, like she has got a really cool companion. I'm not going to tell you about her companion, because you kind of find out quite a way through the book, like who he is. I'll say it's a he, but that's what I'm gonna say. And I think it was a really amazing touch, and as well as the main story of them trying to find Christabel, there was also an amazing story going on between the two, Bridie and her companion. And the combination of Victorian London and the supernatural and mystery, that's probably one of my new favourite genres now. I just love it. I think it was amazing, and I think just the whole pace of the story as well was really cool. I didn't feel bored at any point. And to be honest, again, up until the last few pages, I didn't know what was going to happen. And I really hope that this is going to be like a series, because there was something that happened at the end, and I was kind of like, oh, I want something to carry on. I want this world to carry on. I want to read more about Bridie. The next book was a reread for me, and I'm going to count it anyway because I feel like I really properly read it this time around. And it is The Hobbit, of course, by J.R.R. Tolkien. And I mean, I think most of you know what this is about. If you don't know, it's about a hobbit called Bilbo Baggins who goes on a very exciting adventure with a wizard and some dwarfs. And I just loved rereading this because I read this when I was younger, a lot younger, when I was a kid. And I don't think I really fully appreciated it. And I picked up this copy when I was traveling a few years ago, because the copy that I have kept from when I was a kid, I kept the graphic novel version of it because it is obviously beautiful, and I thought, no, I actually want to read it in its proper form in a book. So that's what I've done. I picked it up and I read it, and it was just amazing. I just love the whole world of Middle-earth. I have read all of the Lord of the Rings books as well, and it's one of those series that I could just happily reread. I mean, the Lord of the Rings books are quite intense. They're very description heavy, but I could definitely reread them again at some point in my life. And I'm just happy that I've got this because this is going to stay on my bookshelf along with my Lord of the Rings books as well. Now, this next book was actually a 4.5 stars out of 5, but I wanted to include this because I did really enjoy it. So this is The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton. This is about a girl called Nella. She has just got married to a very wealthy merchant, and she goes to the house for the first time, and pretty much as soon as she walks into the door, things are weird, things are really strange. Her husband Johannes lives with his sister, so obviously she's living in the house with Nella and her husband. There's just some amazing characters in this, and I loved all the characters, even the really annoying ones, which is quite rare for me. And the reason why this was a 4.5 rather than a straight 5 was because at the end something happened to one of the characters and I wanted to know more. Like, they just vanished and you didn't hear anything more about them, and I don't think this is a series, so I want to know what happens. And it was really frustrating, but it's an amazing story. And the really cool thing as well is because this is set in 1686 in Amsterdam, I learned a lot of new words, and they were a lot of words of the time, but also words that are common in Amsterdam that we wouldn't necessarily have in the English language, because I love books where I actually learn words as I read along. So the next book I'm going to talk about is The Keeper of Lost Things by Ruth Hogan. It's about a woman called Laura, and she has been working for a man who has a weird obsession with lost things. It kind of stems from when he lost something that was very important to him, and then from then on he has been collecting all of these items that have just been on the floor and been lost, and he picks them up and he keeps them, and he has set her with the task of trying to reunite all of these lost items with their owners. And it's a parallel story between Laura and Eunice. You kind of get a feel of what's happening parallel wise, and how when the stories start to merge into one. It was one of those reads that kind of stays with you for quite a while, and I really thought about it after. Also as well, I really liked the mix of supernatural that came into it as well, and I wasn't really expecting it. It was a nice little thing that crept in and kind of made the book a little bit eerie, which was quite a nice touch. The next book I'm going to tell you about is First They Killed My Father by Loing Ung. I don't know if I said that right, as usual. Now, I have to tell you, this is not a light read whatsoever. I picked this up when I was in Cambodia, and this is basically about a girl who went through the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. Now, I suggest you do some read up of yourself about what happened, because there is a lot happened over the space of about 20 odd years or so, and I think it is definitely an important read because not many people talk about what happened. When I went to Cambodia, they're actually very proud of their relations, because this is not ancestors, this happened really recently, so I would say relations, and a lot of people there actually lived through it and are still alive and survived. Honestly, heartbreaking. This is told from the perspective of a 5-year-old. So when she decided to write this, Loing Ung wanted to do it from the perspective of her 5-year-old self, because she felt that otherwise it would be too matter of fact, and it really does bring the emotions out, because it's seeing what happened through the eyes of a child who doesn't really understand what's going on, and also what happens to her family as well, which is horrible. The next book I want to talk about is Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. Oh, I just loved this. This was so much fun. I got completely lost in it, and I actually didn't realise I was near to the end of the book until I was a few pages away, and I was like, oh gosh, this is ending, okay. So this is about a boy who is pretty much recruited into, oh, there goes my pile of books, into a training program, and which is going to help fight the war against the buggers, as they call them, which are basically the aliens in the story. And it's his journey through his training, and then when he finishes his training, as he is pretty much called up to serve, sort of thing. And they're all children. There are more books in this kind of universe, which I'm definitely going to be reading. There must have been so much thought that went into creating this universe where Ender lives, because it is so detailed. There were times actually when I didn't actually empathise with Ender. Again, he's not this perfect prodigy child. He is flawed. He doesn't really get on well with some people. He's quite a hard nut. I think the ending was slightly rushed. That's the only thing I would maybe say about it. To be honest, I wouldn't have minded if he'd strung it out a little bit more. I would have happily read it. But I'm excited to read the other books as well and see what happens to Ender. The next book is Me Before You by Jojo Moyes. Oh my gosh. I cried, okay? I cried. I'll say it, I cried. And I have no shame in that whatsoever. This was amazing. This was romantic without being too soppy, and I'm a romantic at heart, and I think I really appreciated that. So this is about Louisa, who ends up being employed to look after a quadriplegic called Will, and it is basically the love story that develops between the two of them. This isn't your conventional love story. This is definitely not one of those romance novels that you will get a lot of kind of action in or whatever. This is very slow pace, but it is absolutely perfect. I also love the character of Louisa. I feel like if she was a real life person that would be best friends, from her dress sense to her big heart. I have already bought the second book as well, and I'm going to be reading that this year. The next book is The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. This is basically about the true story of Lale, I think. Oh, I hate names. He is essentially ends up at Auschwitz and becomes the tattooist of Auschwitz, and it's also a love story because he falls in love with a young girl called Gita, and it's how their fight for survival and their fight to be together as well in a pretty horrific place. I like the fact that this wasn't too fancy. It wasn't like really fact driven. I know there's been some hoo-ha about the facts in this, so obviously don't consult this as like a factual novel. You know, if you want to again do your own research, do your own research. I've been to Auschwitz and I studied it a lot at school, so I had quite a good background going into this, knowing a lot of the facts for myself sort of thing. But I still think it's a beautiful read, and I think it's done so sympathetically because Heather Morris actually went and obviously interviewed Lale and got the story from him. I also really appreciated the material that's at the end of this book. Again, I won't spoil it because it kind of spoils the whole story, but it shows her actually going to where Lale lived and also talking to Lale, and there's pictures of them and everything, and it kind of just made it real. This next book was gifted to me by HarperCollins, and I really didn't expect to love it as much as I did. This is The Last Widow by Karen Slaughter. Now this is part of a series, and so I didn't actually realise that going into it, but I don't think it mattered. So this follows the character of Will, who is a detective agent, probably the best word, with the GBI, which is the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And I really found that it didn't matter that I hadn't read the rest of the series, because I mean obviously he is currently in a relationship with one of the other main characters, and that I think progresses through the first few books. I think this is book 11, I think. This is basically about a kidnapping that happens, and then a few months later there is a bombing at a hospital and how it all links together. Will has to end up going undercover to save his girlfriend Sarah. Now this does jump between different people's perspectives. I at first didn't like that at all because I found the first couple of scenes a lot of stuff was repeated, and I don't mind things being repeated if it's condensed, but some of it had just been copied and pasted, and I was like, oh, I'm just reading the same thing again. But then as the characters kind of separated, things did link together, but a bit more smoothly rather than just chunks of things being repeated again. Also, this was over 400 pages and was the longest book I read this year, but it was so well paced. It was quite fast paced, and I just found that I flew through this and I loved it. And I'm definitely going to be picking up some of the earlier books as well. And this was actually in the Goodreads Awards this year, and I was so chuffed because I was like, oh, I didn't expect to see that in the awards. But yeah, I really loved it. It was a really good book. Right, I've got 2 more books left. The next one is going to be How Do You Like Me Now by Holly Bourne. This was a favourite book of mine overall this year as well. This is basically what happens to Tori, who is a 30-something-year-old, and the highs and lows of her going through her career, juggling a relationship she's not happy in, juggling friends, things like that. It's basically the highs and lows and everything in between of being a 30-plus-year-old. Now, I'm not 30-plus, but I really found this amazing to read as kind of a future thing, and some of it I did relate to because it does reference things like social media and the effect it has on us, how we perceive ourselves, how we scrutinize how we look, and things like that. Also toxic relationships. So even though I'm not 30 plus, I felt like I related to a lot of it. And I think the reason why a lot of people have loved this, not just me, is that she is so relatable. Tori as a character is so relatable, and again, she's flawed. I think we all love a flawed character, and she is flawed. But the thing as well is that I was really rooting for her throughout the whole of this book. I didn't hate her at any point. There were points when I hated certain characters quite a lot. The last book of my 5-star 2019 books is The Five by Hallie Rubenhold. So my friend very kindly gave this to me because she works at a bookshop, so I don't think this is the original cover, but if you love true crime or anything to do with Jack the Ripper or anything, this is a must read. This was so good. So Hallie Rubenhold is a social historian, and she wanted to have a look at the victims of Jack the Ripper, because everyone's assumption is that they were all prostitutes, and that is not the case. And I think she really roots for them in this. She really shows them to us as they were, she goes through basically a mini history of their lives and up until the point when they were killed, and she really does kind of put the record straight with people who just presume they were all prostitutes. I think the thing for me that made this 5-star was the fact that when I went about my day, I found myself thinking about the woman that I was reading about at that time, which was really strange. Their stories really stuck with me throughout my day, and then when I came back to read this in the evening or whatever, I found like I wanted to read more about them. I was so involved in their lives. It did highlight them as women rather than just names in a newspaper or names on a grave or things like that, or names in an inquest. So I think this is a really important book. There we go. Those were my favourite books from 2019. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope maybe some of these books were on your favourite list as well. I can't wait for this next year of reading. I plan to read 35 books. I hope I will get to that. I may even go over it like I did last year, who knows. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please do let me know. Like, comment, subscribe if you are new, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!